Alright, my name is Joshua Parrish, and I'm going to talk to you guys today about decreasing cancer risk for Milwaukee firefighters. So, a little bit of background on this project. The picture that you see in this image is actually me and a bunch of people that I currently work with and used to work with. So, I'm the one in the white smock. In addition to being a public health nerd, I am also a battalion chief in the Milwaukee Fire Department. The young lady standing directly across from me is Kristen Saganik. She actually died last year in December of cancer, and we're actually standing in front of our firefighter memorial here at the Milwaukee Fire Department. So cancer risk among firefighters is actually a relatively well-established fact, and the Milwaukee Fire Department actually had one of the few sister combinations in the nation that actually started my career as a firefighter with Kristen's sister, who's actually still alive and working with us today. And Kristen actually died of colon cancer, which we're going to speak to you guys a little about later. Alright, so just a quick overview. While we talk about firefighters and cancer risk, there's actually 4 different types of firefighters I like to talk about when I describe firefighting to people. First of all, you have volunteer and rural firefighters. So these are going to be your firefighters who are not paid, and they're responding to calls on a volunteer basis, and primarily in rural or really small towns. These firefighters don't have as high incidence of cancer because they're just not getting the type of call volume that firefighters in bigger cities are. And you have suburban and smaller town firefighters. So small cities, I typically say underneath 100,000 or so-ish people. Again, not a whole lot of call volume. Smaller fire departments, and what these fire departments lack is like the resources to do good epidemiological data, and then they also lack some resources to support their firefighters to reduce some of that risk that they do encounter. The wildland firefighters and U.S. Forest Service is a totally different animal, all animals themselves. And then you have major metropolitan fire departments. These are going to be the top 200-ish metro areas in the country. And this is what I really focused my projects on. Specifically narrowed it down to firefighters in the Milwaukee Fire Department because I had access to I had a lot of access to that population. And the picture that you see here is actually our construction and maintenance division, which is going to come up later on in this research. Alright, so the next thing that came up was my literature review. So I did a bunch of research into some of the specific cancer risks that firefighters experience. So again, looking at not just cancer in general as an umbrella category, what specific cancers that firefighters in major metropolitan areas are getting. So I came across some really interesting research, some really good stuff actually, that looked at mortality studies for firefighters between 1950 and 2009 in 4 very large cities, not just to look at what kind of cancers were they getting, but also kind of establish a dose response relationship for these busier fire departments. The second thing we looked at was different rates of absorption for different body areas to really kind of drill down on, okay, if we're going to work to prevent cancer, we can't prevent the exposure to the carcinogens. That just comes with the work. So looking at how can we actually look and see where the carcinogens are actually getting into the body, and then addressing that in that respect. And then finally, when we looked at all the different ways that this preventative measure was going to work, we also had to look and see what the political structures were of some of the states that we're working on, specifically in Wisconsin, which has a limited presumptive cancer law. And essentially what that is that in the state of Wisconsin, for firefighters, it is assumed that some cancers are a direct result of exposures that occur in the work environment. So different states have different presumptive cancer laws. And what was a very interesting part of some of the research that came up was the dermal absorption rates in different parts of the body that was directly proportional to the thickness of the skin in those parts. So I said, fascinating research. Really dug into a lot of different types of data, and it helped inform what theory we're going to use to affect this behavior. Alright, so the method in which we went about changing the health behavior was applying the theory of planned behavior, which has multiple different considerations when using it, but I went with a few that really were applicable to my target audience. The first was the interest of the target audience in changing the behavior. Firefighters have a vested personal interest in adapting behaviors that do reduce their likelihood of getting cancer. We all have families. We all want to live long retirements. And cancer is a very visible thing in our profession. Secondly, we have ample opportunity to perform the protective behaviors. And these opportunities are actually not only permitted by the department that I work for, but they're also encouraged, both formally and informally through our leadership, and then also at the firehouse level. And then finally, the institution as a whole has a vested interest in us, adopting these cancer prevention behaviors. And while it would be great to say that every employer really cares about our employees, because we have that that presumptive cancer law, it does mean that when individuals are contracting cancer, the department and or the state or the government is absorbing that cost. So by investing for the institution, by investing in preventative behaviors, one of the things that we're doing is actually reducing some of the cost of operation for that institution. All right, so quick review of some of the objectives that we're shooting for. Once again, as a quick reminder, our objectives are kind of these more near-term goals. The first objective was to provide all of our firefighters with a second helmet liner by the end of 2020. Quick Google search revealed that these are about $120 a piece, and we're just shy of 800 individuals. So while it is a substantial dollar investment, in the grand scheme of our $100+ million budget, it's not a huge expenditure. The second was just a behavior item to increase the showering gear, helmet, and hood and helmet liner washing after car fires, which was identified in our research as another incident where there's an opportunity for us as firefighters to reduce our exposure to some of the harmful carcinogens. And then as a more longer-term goal, we want to increase the frequency of helmet liner washing on the MFD firefighters to within about 10% of the washing percentage that we experience with gear, gloves, and hoods by the end of 2021. And then also work on that showering after car fires, and once again, bringing within one standard deviation of the number that we're getting for house fire washing or house fire showering. So in doing that, we need to establish a baseline. So what I did for my survey is actually went out and talked to the firefighters that I had available to me in my battalion to kind of get a baseline. I work in a pretty busy area of the city. I have companies that are doing upwards of 5,000 or 6,000 calls a year. So I was able to get a good idea of how much they were washing their stuff, how much they were washing different pieces of equipment, and then how much they were using the supplied baby wipes that we give all of our companies for use after house fires, and then also how often they were showering. And what appeared was that we're washing helmet liners about a fifth as often as we're washing our gear. The gloves and hoods were actually pretty close to the gear washing. And also that's a really, really small standard deviation as well, which means that there just really isn't much variation in the helmet liner washing, where we had a lot of more variation in the gear washing, which is actually due to a subset of the population. Our drivers don't go into fires as much, so they don't feel the need to. One of the things that we noticed in reviewing this data was that the use of baby wipes just really isn't there. And I said, ultimately, for things that we're going to invest time and resources into changing a behavior, this will actually be something that I'll be looking at, probably abandoning, only because it just hasn't picked up as much as the other areas has, and other areas are so much more efficient. So as opposed to trying to adapt a new behavior, it's probably going to be easier to increase the frequency of existing behaviors or to tie more positive behaviors to existing behaviors. So looking at the theory of planned behavior, we were able to actually intervene at all of these levels, looking to bring in some positive spillovers of existing gear washing activities, and then once again, make that gear washing behavior a lot more convenient. It's already a highly social behavior. The funny thing is that we actually even joke about, taking showers after fires. Company officers are really good, especially in my station and in my the companies that I'm responsible for, about encouraging and make sure that the fires do the behavior, and we even give them time out of service after an event to make sure that happens. Since we have lost a few other firefighters to cancer, it's become a cultural norm in our department to wash your gear relatively frequently. Also, increasing the availability of these really, really expensive firefighting gear wash, which are actually called extractors. will actually also make that, give individuals the tools to make that action a lot more convenient for them. While the extractors are an incredibly expensive economic investment, I think we just won a grant for about $300,000, which is only going to buy, I want to say, another couple dozen, or not even a couple dozen of them. However, like I said, once again, when you look at the extended costs of cancer treatment and firefighters on, sick leave, injury leave, and so on and so forth, that the cost, there is some return for that initial investment. From a political standpoint, one thing that's interesting about trying to get individuals to adopt behavior is that sometimes one of your options is going to be to mandate that behavior. But then you always get detractors, and there's you may or may not get some negative backlash from creating additional policies. Well, what we have here is that we have a positive behavior that's already normalized and supported by the individuals, it's supported culturally, it's supported from the leadership. So there's really no need to create additional policies to mandate the behavior. It's really just making sure that from a administrative standpoint, that the policies that we have in existence support the current behaviors or support additional use of the equipment that we're going to have and be investing in. So, as I mentioned before, moving forward with this preventative behavior, this is interesting that this is something that we're actually going to do as an institution. I was actually able to work with my department and present some of my research to them. They were very interested, and they're actually moving forward with some other possibilities based on some of the research that I did. So, as I mentioned before, we actually got a grant from the federal government to purchase more of these industrial washers or extractors. It's quite the substantial investment in cancer prevention for our firefighters, but it also does represent a long-term cost savings for the city, which is ultimately self-insured. We're covering a lot of our costs out of budgetary dollars. So, but what's interesting is that, like I said, budgetary dollars weren't available for this item. This is something that we had to go to the feds for and actually get political support at the state level to actually do. And the second item is the exploration of what's called the clean cab. When you're looking at pieces of equipment that are actually contaminated that firefighters are exposed to, in addition to their gear, which is an obvious contaminant, the SCBA, or the self-contained breathing apparatus, the air tank that firefighters are wearing on their backs, are actually among the most contaminated pieces of equipment, both before and after the fire. And these are actually kept inside of the riding compartment of the firefighting vehicle, which is a primary means of transportation for those firefighters all day long, including for medical calls, going back and forth to the grocery store. So there is a growing movement across the country to move that piece of equipment out of the vehicle compartment, or out of the passenger compartment, in an effort to reduce firefighters' exposures to carcinogens. So some things to consider, some items to consider as we move forward and think about this idea a little bit deeper. This year, the President and Congress signed what's called the Firefighter Cancer Registry Act of 2018. And basically what the directive was for the CDC to create a voluntary registry of all firefighters in the country who wanted to obviously contribute to the registry, the number of fires they have been to, and then also if they are contracting cancer. This is a Herculean task at best, because first of all, one has to define a fire. We're talking garage fires, house fires, car fires, stove fire, dryer fire, and then the individuals that went may not have been directly exposed to that fire. You have drivers of apparatus, you have individuals on our departments who respond in paramedic units. Individuals like me who actually stand outside and work on the incident command end of it. What's interesting is that another part of this study was to study more underrepresented populations, so specifically women and people of color like Kristen, who there just really isn't a whole lot of epidemiological data on to make conclusions with a high enough competence level with some of those studies. And the second question is a question of return on investment for these types of investments in cancer prevention. Once again, we're a larger department, hundreds of members, hundreds of thousands, or hundreds of millions of dollars in regularly funded budget allocations. For smaller departments, investments like we're making aren't necessarily feasible. And then the other part of the question is, how far do you go in really, reducing cancer risk? I mean, we've gone from, firefighters buying their own equipment to having the department buy that equipment for you, and going to a commissary system where it's, traded, repaired, at no cost to the member, and all that cost is absorbed by the department. So much so to the point where, we've hired a full-time tailor to do nothing but repair and clean, and take out of service equipment that can't be serviced anymore. But at $3,000 per set of firefighting equipment, per individual, you're looking at a $8,000 or $9,000 equipment cost for the individual firefighter once you include gloves, helmet, hood, face pieces, and so on and so forth. So one has to consider, when does it reach the point where investing in prevention is no longer economically feasible for a metropolitan area. And sometimes it's going to be really based on just kind of what they can afford. So I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I'd like to end with this picture, which I think is a really awesome picture. So this actually is a real photo that was used by Pierce Manufacturing, which is actually one of the largest fire truck manufacturers on the planet. It's based here in Wisconsin. And what's really cool about this picture is that this is actually Kristen's sister who's posing for this picture in her gear. So I hope you all enjoy this presentation. I hope you learned something, and thank you all for listening.